heard about the one in Louisiana.
Oh, yes, that's right. It was in New Orleans, wasn't it?
Okay, so we're ready to rip. Can you use this if you want to, you know?
No.
I think I turned it on. Yeah.
Yeah. I got it. Hi, how are you? It's nice to meet you. How are you? Oh, you're so sorry. Yeah, that's hard. It's been raining. Who wants to go? Oh, it all starts small. It's like, oh my gosh. You know, success has its downfall. That's good. Oh, I know. That is true. And then you didn't realize, wow, I couldn't ask anybody to do it. Several positions. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It is so hard to do, you know. Yeah, I hear you. Yes.
Supervisor of this teacher work. So, are you going to be presenting on those?
Julie's out here in San and she was you. Okay. We're going to present it to her.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Good. Appreciate it. So we understand it's people follow down for the first 5 or so minutes. It's sort of long now. You're there. Okay. Okay, good morning. We're glad to have Penny Jester as our lead speaker this morning. Penny is the director of our Clinical Research Support Program, which is generally called CRISP. She's based academically in the Department of Pediatrics and the Division of Infectious Disease. She's a fully trained nurse who coordinates mostly now research nursing activities. She's a very active educator and organizes several programs that she'll tell you all about, which are really valuable ones that some of which pretty much everybody should take, some of which are a little more selective. But I'd really urge you to think about how what her group offers will complement what we do here and will really help get you over the hump of being ready to implement translational science and clinical research for protocols in a really effective way. So after this first hour, there is a group that is a enrollment and retention core facility that helps people to make best contacts with clinical subjects and to keep them involved in their studies. That's led by Mona Fouad and Julie Schack and Ms. Johnson here, who are going to present in the second half of this section.
Thank you.
So occasionally there are people who are joining us from a distance, so if you have a chance to offer questioning at some point, if you can click on the thing so you can see if anybody wants to give a question.
Right here.
That's great, and just repeat the question so everybody can hear it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you all. I'm really delighted to be here. I have to tell you, I'll give you a brief history of what I've been doing, but my real emphasis is all about research implementation and clinical human subjects research implementation. So everything that I do and am involved in is really sort of about that. There are lots of programs on campus, and this course, in fact, it is very important for building your career. But again, conducting a study, you work really hard to get funded, and then you have to do it. And that's the big challenge with human subjects research. But let me go back. So my history has been, I years ago started as a nurse, got my master's in public health, got sucked into research. Did some behavioral research in the School of Public Health, worked in the emergency department as a coordinator. All along the way, I realized we did very little to teach people how to conduct research. And so I then became involved with education in research on a small level. I was a research subject advocate for the GCRC for a while. Again, through my career, 20 years, I've also been doing education. So now my role is the director of the Clinical Research Support Program, where we provide any investigator on campus. It can be from any school as well. We work in the School of Public Health, School of Nursing, predominantly School of Medicine, to provide resources, coordinators, regulatory personnel, data entry to investigators who may need an additional bandwidth to the ability to conduct studies. Through this group also, I have a small group of us prepare and help investigators submit INDs and IDEs. If you know anything about those, I'll touch on those a bit. We also, in our office, under the CRISP umbrella, have support for ClinicalTrials.gov, which I'll explain later in this program. And then the third thing is certainly the education, which has grown dramatically. Historically, you don't learn how to do research. You don't learn how to conduct research when you go to college. I mean, whether you're in pre-med, whether you're in medical school, you really don't get into the nuts and bolts of how to do it. Nursing school is the same way. Nobody really teaches you how to do it. So this has become, again, an overriding effort that we've been trying to undertake. And what's happening is nationally, it's becoming a bigger deal. There's an attempt right now to build standards whereby if you are going to be conducting research with human beings, possibly in a few years, even physicians, even nurses, we're all going to have certification of some kind, just to make sure we do it right. And I'm going to sort of talk about that because that's what good clinical practices are. It's the best practice for conducting research. My whole presentation is going to be about rigor and transparency. These two words came about really in the fall. This is a mandate of NIH, and the FDA is quite involved with this as well. So if you think about rigor, You know, that term is really about strict precision, doing it right, following the guidelines. That's really what ICH GCPs and all GCPs are about, which I will explain. Transparency, openness, making sure we, you know, when you do any research study, no matter with a human being, that human being is put at risk. They are giving you something. They are giving you part of their time. Maybe that's all it is. They're putting themselves at risk. And we owe the public the opportunity, the ability to see those results. And so that's kind of what transparency comes from, making sure what we do gets published. And it just as a sideline, you do a research study, you don't enroll it fully, or it's a bad study. Journals don't want to publish that. I mean, it's hard to find a good journal that would publish a not so good study. So therefore, that's what ClinicalTrials.gov is about, giving us a venue, because you have learned something even with a bad study. You don't want anybody repeating it, so you know, we'll come back to that. So just kind of reiterate, excuse me, one thing I do, I don't wear a watch, so I just have my phone turned off. The definition of research, this overrides everything that we're going to talk about today. And I hope you've seen this before, but just to repeat it, that research is a systematic investigation, think of GCPs, systematic, including research development, testing, evaluation, designed to develop or contribute to the generalizable knowledge. Generalizable knowledge, that is what we're working for in clinical research. Anything we collect has got to be available to the public. That's our intent, to improve public health in some way. Whether it's a drug study, a device study, or behavioral study. Throughout this, it will sound at times like I probably have more of an emphasis on drug studies, but really almost every principle we're going to talk about is applicable to behavioral intervention studies and even observation studies. Again, if you're putting a human subject through a trial of any kind, these principles pretty much stand pretty solid. Some of my slides are kind of dense, and I'm not going to read through them. I know that you have them. But just ICH GCPs, and I failed to spell that out, International Conference on Harmonization, Good Clinical Practices. Good clinical practices embodies a lot. ICH GCPs is a specific set of guidelines. Now, in the U.S., when the ICH GCPs were developed, they were developed for international use. It was thought if we all conducted studies the same way, then a study that was conducted in Ireland, the FDA would accept all their data because it was conducted under the same guidelines. Well, we are Americans, and although many, many countries have accepted the ICH GCPs as law, and we support them, we've kept our Code for Federal Regulations under the FDA. We didn't accept them as law. But I would tell you, if you compared the U.S. Code for Federal Regulations with the ICH GCPs, they nearly mirror each other. There's very little difference. It's just that I also would tell you that the ICH GCPs are a whole lot easier to read and understand. If you've ever tried to read legal language, that's what the Code for Federal Regulations is all about. But there is really very, very little conflict between the two. So we do emphasize ICH GCPs in much of what we do. So again, the purpose of these GCPs, as I said, was to have a unified standard where we could accept data from around the world. Many countries were involved in the development, and as was the U.S. Now backing up, so I'm going to go back to just good clinical practices. What are those GCPs? They come from many sources. As I said, the ICH GCPs. If you've done your IRB training, how many of you have done any of your IRB training? You probably were exposed to the Belmont Report, the Nuremberg Code, Helsinki Accord. All of those contain elements of GCPs. What is a GCP? And I'll repeat it again in here. It's really just two things: protection of human subjects and how to collect the best data and in a rigorous manner. So again, every one of these would address those two principles in some way. So again, as I said, any GCP is going to address one or both of these, either the way to collect the best data in a rigorous manner and or the best ways to protect your human subjects. GCPs apply throughout the course of an entire study, from when you design it to conducting it, performing it, monitoring it, auditing it, recording and analyzing, and also reporting your results. Again, all of them talk about, in some way, how to protect your human subject and how to collect good data. You know, for years people would talk about GCPs and I thought, this is complicated, what is it? But it's not. There are so many ways that, you know, you already know a lot of this. You may not know you know it, but you do, because you know what protecting human subjects is all about. You know how to have good data. Again, where do they come from? As I've said before, there are laws, there are regulations, guidance documents, guidelines, SOPs, training, audit, compliance manuals. So laws, there are laws on the books in the U.S. that, you know, you can't harm a person. Well, in a way, that's a GCP. You know, you're not supposed to hurt anyone. Regulations, there's a code for federal regulations, also a law in the U.S. You don't want to, you might, if you violate that, you could be penalized, you could be sent to jail. You could lose your license. Guidance documents are a little bit less rigorous. Guidance documents in the U.S. are more like the ICH GCPs, because again, we haven't accepted it as law, but also other guidance documents that the IRB might have. Our IRB has guidance documents for how you do research at UAB. Guidelines, you may have guidelines from your sponsor, and you may have guidelines that you have in your office. You may have guidelines that are specific to your protocol as well. Standard operating procedures, those are, again, those are more the guidelines for your office. I don't know if you have used standard operating procedures, but if you have an office that does a lot of research, you should have SOPs, but they're all going to address how to keep your subject safe and how to get good data. Last of all, training manuals, audits, compliance manuals. Again, everything, it just all builds on itself. It all builds and contributes to good clinical practices. So why are there so many regulations? Because we as humans like to make mistakes, and they happen all the time. And so it's like if people kept going through an intersection, what are they going to do? They started using stop signs because they were tired of people getting killed. Tuskegee was a big motivator to, again, build guidelines for the IRB to be in place in order to protect human subjects. And it's always evolving, because even as recent as a few years ago, we changed some of our guidelines and requirements here at UAB, and they would be GCPs. So does anyone know about the support study? This was a trial that was national, 52 sites. Coordinating center was here at UAB. It was with very preemie, very young babies who were born. And we didn't know, I mean, the clinicians, that's never been researched how much oxygen those children should receive. So the standard of care, without any evidence-based research, the evidence was that you give the child between 85 and 95% oxygen saturation. Not a big deal. Well, what's better, 85 to 90, 90 to 95? The doctors were trying to determine what was the best practice. So they, again, built this study, 52 sites across the country, IRB approval, NIH approval, consents were approved by everyone. This was such a rigorous group, they even wrote articles about what they were doing. Well, after all was said and done, I think in 2013, 2014, there was a lawsuit. Because what they were doing was, I should just describe the design to you, children would enroll in this study, and they would, in a blinded manner, be randomized to 85 to 90 or 90 to 95. The consent form clearly said that, you know, side effects, because if you know a consent form, you're always going to have, what are the risks to being in this study? Well, one of the risks was maybe blindness, because if you give too much oxygen, the child could be blind. Another risk was brain damage. If you don't give enough oxygen, the child could be brain damaged. All of that was in the consent form. But what wasn't in the consent form was the fact that if you are randomized to this arm, this is what might happen. Again, one could argue if you were randomized to the 90 to 95, your child might go blind or might have the possibility. We know, and I will tell you, I was involved with a research study where we were trying to dose newborns who had the flu with Tamiflu, and we had to put in the consent form that there was a risk of death because when we gave 500 times the normal dose to rats, baby rats, they died. Now, we were never going to give that much to these children, but we had to put the risk in the consent form, but let the parents know that that did happen. But anyhow, I diverted. So what happened was the lawsuit ended up not going through, but the issue was our IRB changed their practice. Their new GCP, so to speak, was when you write your risk section, you will have a set of risks if you're in one arm and a set of risks if you were in another arm. Now, it was all in there, and the parents were going to be blinded not to know which arm they were in, but still, it changed our practice because of a complaint, because of a concern. So we're never done changing our regulations, and it's going to be perpetual, I think. And so the regulations just sort of go on and on at times. But again, keep in mind, safety of subject and good data. It covers everything. So GCPs. One of the things that happened in the fall, and you have some information on this, I hope I didn't overload you with paper. I'm not very good at just sending things electronically. In the fall, in September of 2016, NIH has begun requiring that every investigator, every person involved, all the people described here on the investigator clinical trial staff must have GCP training. How many of you have had GCP training? Do you know? It's an online course. You can all get to it. It's on the Miami CITI website, or go to the UAB IRB website, and I have the information on the slide. But for the first time ever now, when we talk about training, people are taking it more seriously. Now, you know, you have to have your human subjects protection training, but now you also, even our IRB is going to require it for every trial, not just NIH trials, that they have GCP training. And so if you go to submit an application to the IRB and you haven't done your GCP, you won't get it approved until you take the training. Training's 4 or 5 hours online. But again, going back to the definition of what GCPs are, this is actually from the notice of a policy change from the NIH. Ensuring the safety, integrity, and quality of clinical trials can be improved by having GCP training and understanding the parameters that are involved there. The next few slides are, I'm not going to read them. I just want you to see what the content of the ICH GCPs are, so that you know if you need to go look it up, you can. The ICH GCPs are online. They'll give you, you know, that you can read, you know, in great detail what each of these categories are. But the ICH GCPs, which is what the training course is based on, you know, covers the ethics committee, the IRB, gives definitions. What are the investigator responsibilities? To tell you, it's the one thing we tend not to take as seriously, I think, as we should, and it's really nobody's fault, but nobody talks about how important your responsibility is as an investigator. Again, quite a number of topics. Also, sponsor responsibilities. They're listed there as well. Protocol and protocol amendments. There's nothing in here about your support staff. So what that means to me is the ICH GCPs, they must think that the investigator is doing everything. But it does say in there that the investigator will delegate, that you would have the responsibility of delegating it to trained personnel. Investigator brochure, again, if you're doing a drug study. So even ICH GCPs, although there's still some content in here that's related to drug studies, it's also required for device studies and behavioral studies, but I'll explain that in a minute. Again, essential documents. I think the one thing I would note if you're just getting into research, one of the things about essential documents, that's your IRB approval. If you have a lab, you have to have the CLE and the CAP. If you're an investigator, your CV, those are all considered essential documents. What is it that qualifies you? What is it that qualifies your site to be set up to provide a safe environment for subjects? That's essentially what the essential documents are. But if you do a drug study, you would be quite familiar with that, or a device study. I think when we do behavioral research, we don't always lead into that, but we should. So again, there are differences in required regulations for whether you're doing a biologic or drug, whether you're doing medical devices or epidemiologic or natural history. Different people sort of oversee it. Certainly with your biologics and drugs, that's the FDA. Excuse me, as are the medical devices, and that's also under the FDA. DHHS sort of oversees other types of studies. So let's say you're doing a behavioral study, social research. There is a GCP course that you can take. It's just been, it was just released this year. It's online, it's free. It would be worth your while taking it. So what it does is it takes all the drug stuff out of the GCP course. But it's really quite a nice program. It was put together by the CTSs. Again, this is a website if you need GCP course, just the standard GCP course for UAB. Again, it's that Miami CITI, much like the human subjects training. It's really, again, it's not too complicated. The one thing, though, that if you look back at I gave you the printout of what the good clinical again, what the NIH award announcement about requirement for good clinical practices. So the ICH GCP, or I'm sorry, the Miami CITI is the basics. That's like the bottom level. You should continue to learn more and more about GCPs, and that's what the NIH says, that this is the basics, but you need to keep going. And I'll show you some of the courses we have going on. But to sidetrack a little bit, in 2014, there was a document that was released about competencies, Joint Task Force research competencies, and you actually have an article. It's called Moving from Compliance to Competencies. And that article is something that's being used as a pivotal point for building what we call the certification, if we get to a certification. This is going to be the framework. There's also, well, yeah, there's also in here, just so you know, it's in your handout, it's the article. Then there's a spreadsheet. It has all the competencies listed. And what really should happen, I think in the, still being fine-tuned, but look at the competencies. If you want to be a certified investigator in time, again, this is not on the books yet, but that's where they're moving, you will have acquired knowledge and experience in all of the different competencies, but it's just sort of a checklist for point of reference. The competencies, again, they're still GCPs, but these are the topics they cover. There are actually, I think it's 8 competencies, and then there are 52, or excuse me, 8 domains with 52 competencies. Again, it's, I won't read through this but it's really all about doing good research. But it's another, I would say, a directive, another pathway to take to get to where you need to be. This is a schematic of what we're doing at UAB. We started actually 10 years ago. Let's see if I have, do I have a pointer, Gene?
You have to use the mouse.
Okay, I can do that. Sorry. Probably it works better for me. All right, so the very first program we started 10 years ago was one for clinical research coordinators. This program is 24 hours long. The fundamental part of it is all about GCPs. I mean, how are you going to conduct research? Because of the mandates that were coming out, we began building more and more programs. So if you take us to where we are today, we would, and again, these timelines are just recommendations. These are not yet mandated by the university. Will they be? I don't know. But what we have is, you know, taking, as we've talked about, the Miami CITI, GCP, and HSP training. If you're just getting into research, we would encourage everyone to do that within a few weeks. We also have what we call the Research Orientation Program, which is the second box down. This is a program that takes place the 4th Thursday, almost, we've altered it a few, but generally the 4th Thursday of every month in this room for 4 hours. It's really about, it talks about roles and responsibilities in depth. What do you do before you start a study? What should you do during a study? And what should you do at the end of the study? Again, we developed this program to be taken within a few months of employment, or some people have been doing research for years and they're still coming. But it, again, to keep you from getting into trouble. It's not a lot of information, but it gives you a nice framework to know you've got a lot more to learn. Starting last year, but we've modified it, Clinical Investigator Training Program. We had 2 sessions last year, and they were each 4 hours long. And this was sort of a mirror image to the coordinator training program, but it was for investigators. Well, we got wise. Everybody thought about it. Now it's 18 hours, and we're starting our first pilot this week. We have 15 trainees in the course, and it's going to be, it's very much a hands-on, but it's for investigators. It's again, the framework is from GCPs, but it's really a hands-on and how you work through the UAB system, because we're bringing in also issues related to OSP, and which is a sponsored projects protocol, or excuse me, projects office, IRB. Again, not only how to do it, but how to do it at UAB is what this course is addressing. Right now, it's going to be offered again in the fall. If anyone's interested, please consider applying. It is we have 4 4-hour sessions, and then we have 1 evening where we just do 2 hours. But we've been breaking the groups into, the class is broken into groups, and they're working on a mock protocol so they can actually apply some of the principles we're talking about. Last of all, a program we've had going on for 2 years is a research seminar, which is first and third Thursday of every month in this room for an hour, and we pick different topics. Like last week we did a session on, it was actually 2 hours, not just 1, on how to complete your IRB application. We are having one the third Thursday of this month. It's going to be on how to negotiate budgets with pharmaceutical companies. We have done, training on how to use ClinicalTrials.gov. We base the course, it's throughout the year we offer it first and third Thursday, and we base it on the needs that are expressed to us about how problems people are having doing research. We bring outside speakers in. It's open to anyone. There's no fee. So it's nice to have it around. I think it's usually posted on the CCTS website. That's what the courses are, so just check that out. And just so you know, we've got a couple of other things. The gamification is something we've included. That's where you play games on your phone that are designed for each of the courses, but it's again, answer questions, you're in teams. It's just to reinforce the knowledge. And then every quarter we have a lunch and learn, which is about 2 hours, hour and a half long. It's usually in the Spain auditorium. It's less about the specifics of research and more about issues at UAB. We have OSP come and talk about changes they're making in the IRB, come and talk. The people who manage budgets come and talk. Again, most of the people who attend that course often are coordinators, managers, administrators, but if you have any of those people, encouraging them to come to hear what's new at UAB and research would be really important. And again, as you can see, the content is based on our competencies and GCPs. That's what we're trying to focus on. So you notice the first slide was about rigor and transparency. So now I'm going to talk about transparency. And as we said, I mean, if you run a research study, one of the things we do, because I do some investigator-initiated trials, and which is a little bit different than pharmaceutical studies, in that I know we've put the data together, we know what the design of the study is, we know in the end, when we're writing our final study report, what the results are, and we know which of if it was a blinded study, we know what subject was on which arm, again, after the data's been analyzed. So if you think about it, it's ethically right for us to send a note, send a letter, send an email to the people who participated in our studies, whether it's blinded or not. Maybe tell them what arm they were in and then what the results were. Most people, I've been in studies before, and because the analysis takes place 4 years after the study has ended or my involvement's been ended, I don't know what happened, and then I forget about it. But really, as researchers, we kind of owe that to our subjects. So, and that's kind of one of the reasons they put ClinicalTrials.gov in place. Again, why do we have it? We owe it to the public to give them the results. Again, needing a public forum to post the trials because people aren't going to, your neighbor's not going to go out and buy the New England Journal of Medicine to see what the results of their study were. And as I mentioned earlier, studies that aren't successful should be posted because I've spoken to many investigators who actually go on the public site and enter in, you can do really nice searches and find a protocol maybe similar to theirs to see if the results were reported, to see what the design was, and to see how you want to modify that. You don't want to repeat what somebody's done, but that's another good place. I know you all go through journals to look for that sort of thing, but ClinicalTrials.gov also serves that purpose. So briefly, the history, it's been around since 1997, and it was just a place to register, just to put your protocol up there. And then in 2000, people got a little bit more excited about it and said, well, let's make sure that we can begin to put data up. And so then in 2007, it became a mandate that if you were doing, and I'll talk about the definitions, what we call an applicable clinical trial. And it's the definition of what CT.gov expects to be posted, registered, and results reported. It's a two-step process. You register at the beginning of the study, and you report your results at the end of the study. And just results. It's not analysis, which is often confusing to investigators. Then in this fall, the same week that we had the mandate on GCP training, that rules changed for ClinicalTrials.gov, making it more of a mandate, making it more rigorous. I became involved with ClinicalTrials.gov in 2012 when there is in the law itself, it's called the FDAAA, and I am not going to tell you what it means. I think it's on one of the slides, but it's Food and Drug Administration Amendment Act. That's what it is. But when they first wrote it in 2007, the penalties for noncompliance on the books, in the law, and you can find it, are if you're delinquent at reporting, it's $10,000. for the first event. And then if after 30 days you don't correct it, it's $10,000 a day. So when I got involved, we got everybody on campus up to speed, and then they never implemented the penalty. So we've meandered for the past 4 years. You know, we keep people do their registration, they get their results posted, but there's been no penalty, no heavy hammer. Well, now there is. They're going there by in April of this year, penalties will start to be enforced. So it makes this, you'll be hearing more and more about it. This is it's something we all need to be aware of. So again, so what happened in September was what they call the final rule, where they said, okay, we've been testing this whole system for 4 years, and now we're going to implement it. And so that's what's happening starting this month. And then the NIH, they got involved too, and they have some issues that they want addressed with ClinicalTrials.gov. So I won't read through this. Again, these are some of the changes. If you've been in ClinicalTrials.gov, there's some changes. The biggest change, though, is the requirements that it be posted and the penalties. This is probably the biggest change. NIH has not made any statement about ClinicalTrials.gov, but, I mean, they might on various protocols, but not as a global issue. Starting this month, if you have a contract or grant with the NIH, they will have in their language that says your protocol must be registered. Even if they only pay for part of your study, they can mandate that it be registered, and it can be behavioral. It doesn't. When this whole thing started, it was just for drug studies, and then it was for drug and device studies, and now NIH is adding to it interventional studies that are diet-based, you know, food additive-based, things that aren't necessarily overseen by the FDA. So again, here's just some definitions of what needs to be posted on ClinicalTrials.gov, what the definitions of the protocols are that need to be again, required. We often call, as I said, the ACT or applicable clinical trial would be what the FDAA would be requiring. But then NIH has its requirements. Also, if you do studies where you sometimes have Medicare is involved in some way, where some part of the study is also being paid for by some tests that Medicare would pay for, Medicare requires what we call an NCT number. NCT is the National Clinical Trial number that you would receive when you register a protocol on ClinicalTrials.gov. For Medicare to make those payments, they want that NCT number, so they also have their requirement. And then journals. The other thing we have found, journals want NCT numbers. They want protocols registered. I've even had investigators call me. They finished the study a year ago. They're trying to get it published, and it wasn't required to be posted on ClinicalTrials.gov, but the journal wants the NCT number. So we just register it. They get the number, and everybody's happy. But it's everybody, in so many parts of research, everybody has a bit of a different expectation. So you need to know what your sponsor wants, as well as what the regulations are. And the journal. The International Council on Medical Journal Editors, they think that every protocol that is published in one of their journals should be registered on ClinicalTrials.gov. Real quickly, there are two parts. There's registration and results reporting. Registration is what you do within your first month of when you start a study, when you start enrolling subjects, and then the results are reported at the end of the study. So, and with registration, if you get into it, you're supposed to update it. You go in once a year and say, yeah, nothing's changed. Or you can go in every 3 months if something has changed and just update the record. We have sites who do, some of the investigators here at UAB run multi-center studies, and they have to list all their multi-centers, all the sites who are working with them. They're the primary. The other thing I need to tell you, only because this is so, I always forget to mention this, if you're doing a pharmaceutical study and the pharmaceutical company is the sponsor, you don't have to do anything. It's only if you're the investigator initiated, because then nobody else is registering it. If you're part of a multi-center study, you don't have to do anything because somebody else takes care of the registration and results reporting. It's only if you're the lead. And so that's why if multi-center study, the investigators here, he just lists the other sites that are participating, but they don't have to do anything. So when should registration be completed? That's kind of an interesting scenario because what the law says is within 21 days of the first subject being enrolled. Okay, so they were enrolled on January 1, but you didn't have to get it registered till January 21. NIH says the same thing. However, in your consent form, if you're doing, with the consent form, it will say in there this protocol is registered on ClinicalTrials.gov. Well, how could you enroll a subject on, my argument is, and this is not really written anywhere, but how could you enroll a subject on day 1, on January 1, with a consent form that says it's registered on ClinicalTrials.gov, but you haven't registered it till the 21st. So again, what we're encouraging investigators to do is get it registered early. Get it registered when you do your IRB application. You can always go in and change things, but that way you'll get your NCT number and everybody will be happy. I think that the IRB is changing the human subjects protocol, the application that you submit to the IRB, to actually require that you get an NCT number before you start. And also I mentioned the clinical billables. You know, you're not going to start a study unless you have your NCT number, because if there is a clinical billable, Medicare is going to be billed, then you want to have that. And that kind of thing happens a lot in cancer trials. I don't know if any of you are doing cancer research, but there's a lot of Medicare really is supportive of research for cancer patients, and so they are willing to pay for, they are often part of paying for the study, or parts of it, at least some of the tests. So when are results reported? By law, within 12 months after the last subject has met his or her primary endpoint, outcome measure. You'll notice on CT.gov you have to list your primary and secondary outcome measures. You can list your tertiary and you can list your exploratory. If I had my way, I would encourage every investigator to have only 1 primary and 1 secondary, and then you can have 500 tertiary because you don't have to report them on ClinicalTrials.gov. I had one investigator who had 56 secondary by the time we broke them all out, and that's just a tedious job. Now, I would also tell you, per the science, maybe that was the appropriate thing to do, but if you have any wiggle room, I would encourage you to have the fewest primary and secondary that you can, but again, it's really based on the science. You can request extensions, and we actually had to do that once when we had a blinded study where the primary outcome measure was met at 6 months after the subject was enrolled, but there were secondary measures 2 years later. It was a blinded study. Well, had we reported the results on ClinicalTrials.gov, we would have had to have unblinded the trial, and then that would have jeopardized our secondary outcome measures. So we asked for an extension. So there are truly extenuating circumstances where you can request extensions, and you've been granted. So penalties are enforced if you're outside your time windows. As I said, you know, you want to do your registering within the right time. You want to do your results reporting within the right time frame. One of the things that happens on ClinicalTrials.gov is once you submit that data, they review it before they publish it publicly, and they'll come back to you with questions. So what's happening is, at least right now, it's written as once they come back to you with questions, if it's registration, you have 15 days to get it in. Outside of the 15 days, you're out of compliance. 25 days for results update, because they will come back. I promise you that. Sometimes I think that it's like, okay, sometimes it's like the IRB. They have multiple reviewers, and everybody looks at it differently, but I think they're getting better. At least they have to now with this. So here are the penalties. The FDAA, what is the penalty? It's the $10,000, as I mentioned. And now the $10,000 is what is in the law. But you do have a handout, I believe. It's the very last one. This came out last week. It's from the FDA, and it's about enforcement and compliance with ClinicalTrials.gov. They have increased it to $11,383 for the first month and then per day. What happens here at UAB? UAB is expecting they are going to be responsible for paying because you are UAB employees. Now, does that take the burden off of you? What I just found out last week is my office usually reminds investigators, do your registration, can we help you with that? Do your results reporting, can we help you with that? Because there have been no penalties, we just sort of keep working with them. What's going to happen now is the clock is going to start when that last subject meets his or her primary endpoint. You have 12 months. At that 8-month point, we will be reporting to risk and compliance that, again, an investigator is on the brink of maybe, he's in the last 4 months of getting his or her results reported. So just kind of raising it to a higher level because the university doesn't want to pay that $11,383. But I've often thought, knowing that the statistics around the country, because most people haven't been doing it well, and the government, we would have no debt. Because if they had been implementing these penalties, we'd pay off the national debt. So, but fortunately, they haven't for all of us investigators. Per the NIH, the big thing there is it's almost as onerous as the the FDAA law. Because what will happen is what the NIH is going to do is either restrict your funds, they're going to restrict from the NIH, they're going to restrict if an investigator is out of compliance. It may impact the ability of the institution to get more NIH funds. And then thirdly, the NIH is going to post publicly on the ClinicalTrials.gov website investigators who fall in the non-compliance. So it's, again, we'll see. You know, as I say, in 2012 we were going to implement these. Now the way this is written, the law has gone into effect as of now, but the penalties and all really won't be implemented until April. So if any of you have any trials, you know, we've got time to get everything up to speed. And it's also true, we're not 100% sure that any of our old studies will actually be affected by the law, but we certainly know the NIH ones won't so much, because when you had your contract with the NIH, there was no stipulation about ClinicalTrials.gov reporting. It is challenging, and but it's required. I think the hardest part is your outcome measure. I would encourage you, if you write a protocol, the biggest challenge we have in helping investigators is writing the outcome measure, a measurable measure that you can, again, put numbers to, whether it's descriptive. Number of subjects who survived at 4 weeks. You know, maybe there are 2 arms to the study. Again, you wanted to match your study, but I have to tell you about a conversation we have. We're getting ready to start a new study with DMID. It's in the NIH, the Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases. And we're going to be, they want us to use, it's a multi-center study. We have 10 sites across the country. We're going to be enrolling children with HSV, newborns with HSV. And we normally here at UAB use the School of Public Health for our data management group because they're really good. Gary Cutter's group, Chichi Yabon, I don't know if they've spoken to you, David Redden, they're very good. And they build really strong FDA compliant databases. Well, with our new contract, NIH, DMID will not, they want us to use EMIS, which is kind of a Beltway Bandit kind of group. They're in Washington, they've got their own business going on. And they've been around a long time. They have a good reputation. So we had a call with them the other day, and they actually asked us, they said, well, they were asking the investigator, can you change your primary outcome measure? Because this is going to be hard to get into ClinicalTrials.gov. We don't, again, the tail wagging the dog, again, that's the downside of this. We've got to be careful that we don't let the requirements dictate how we do research. So we argued the point that the end point they wanted us to put in wasn't appropriate for the study, and they kind of, they agreed with us. But again, there's going to be that mandate. There's going to be that push now to make sure that what we do fits into ClinicalTrials.gov. It is a one system, but it can be manipulated, and that's why we actually have an office. So there are right now 3 of us who are just available for answering questions, sitting with you, working through the system. We've often helped investigators get their results in or just get it registered. But again, it's been a challenge for many of our seasoned investigators because it is, as I say, putting a square peg into a round hole. But it can be done. Again, many reasons we should care about it. And so, as I said, we have an office. Here's a list of how we can help you, things we can do. And we also can help you get connected with people if we don't know the answer, because we don't always know the answer, believe me. But we know how to get to the right people. So if you think about it, even the transparency, which is what ClinicalTrials.gov is, it is all about good clinical practices. So. Does anyone have any questions? I sort of rattled on. Yes, ma'am.
So at the very beginning, you mentioned resources for helping investigators, particularly young investigators like us who don't maybe have many resources at our disposal. If we want to do something like a very small, pilot study or feasibility study, something like that, what specifically can we apply for to help us have resources for data management and that sort of thing? Because I understand that costs a lot of money.
It can, and if you're doing a really small study, have you been to any of the clinics? So there are 2 things. There are clinics, what do we call them? Drop-in clinics here in PCAMs, and they're usually posted on our website. I think I think CCTS also offers, they have vouchers. So if you're going to do a small study, you can apply for like a $5,000 voucher and we'll provide the services. Also contact us and help us. We will help you walk through and figure out a way to make it work. If that, again, contact me or just go to ccts@uab.edu. But if you want to do something, it's an important study. It's worth our while to try and help you find the resources.
Okay, thanks.
I can maybe say just a little bit more about the voucher since that hasn't really come up yet in this group. So the concept of the voucher is to help people who haven't had a chance to apply for money yet. They need preliminary data. They are just getting a study started to gather some data to take advantage of. Ideally, it's to use resources that are provided through CCTS directed programs, but it doesn't have to be. But it needs to be clearly headed towards either a publication pretty immediately or a grant application pretty immediately. And we can help you. It's a really simple 3-paragraph with a budget kind of application, and it has a limit of $5,000.
That's great.
I would say I went to the drop-in clinic on Wednesday and it really helped. It's from 11:30 to 1, I think.
Yeah, there are 3 different times, and I don't have in my head when they are, but if you look on the CCTS website, there's one that's here, there's one that's in the Azure Pass, and I think there's one other site that you can go and you can call ahead so that people tell you what kind of, those people who are going to be there tell you what kind of information to really bring to make it useful, but if that can be for meeting with a biostatistician to talk about your study design, and take the initial look at the kind of data you're getting to issues and things like that.
And we just added to the drop-in clinics, ClinicalTrials.gov. We'll have people there if you have questions and just want to come and talk to someone. And I think I would end with telling you, get as much education as you can. The course I mentioned for the research coordinator, the research training program, which is essentially for the staff. It's the one that's 26 hours long, actually, and we have 4 6-hour sessions, 1 2-hour session. It's been going on. We've been doing it for 20 sessions, 21 sessions. I could still attend it and learn something new because the more experience you get and you hear the same information in a different context. But there's, it's really research can be frustrating because it is dynamic. It never stays the same, and never 2 studies are the same, and patients, subjects are never the same. So it's an ever-evolving learning process, I think. Thank you all. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break and then
Oh, come on.
So, quick question for you. So, how many people were you the question came back last night. So basically, we're taking that baseline MRI.
Okay.
The goal is to
Right.
Because it's not registered.
Right.
It's due.
Okay, so here's what I was saying. Don't worry about registering. That, that later. But you're not doing an intervention. No, you just don't have an intervention.
Right, so just hold on.
Right. It's observational. Without an intervention. No matter how hard you try.
It's never going to be just, I know. I started like from my heart. That's what I would want to
So, are you using the same?
That's really.
So you'll have IRB approval.
Right.
So it'll be, it's just an observation. So it wouldn't still get IRB approval.
Right, exactly. And for the same study, I got IRB approved.
Right.
They got it. We do it.
Yes,
You know, I think the protocol's sound.
Good.
And no, it's a matter of the 35 documents. All of them. I have to send it. I mean, it's a little.
So busy. I mean, tomorrow it took 2 shots. Yeah, and it was fun. Resubmit my computer crashed, and I had another finally got yesterday, and it was yeah. So I was like, geez. But that's all I know.
That's all you know?
That's all the turkeys I know.
How come?
My father passed away when I was a child. So my mother's in that and she did it. She spoke a little bit. But I would love to study Turkish. Actually, it was Turkey, yeah, but yeah, so but it was actually more in Iraq. But actually Turkish. So yeah.
Why is it I
Exactly. Yeah. Where are you from?
1 year.
Specifically supported by the Minority Health Research Center.
We're part of. Yeah, I think all the
Schedule with Georgia.
Okay.
you know,
Integrate into something else.
so yes, our offices,
Okay.
they have a plan.
Oh. I see. But were they? The branch of it, or they were more European? Oh.
So that here choose so I have
You know?
so it's a mixture of or some middle. 12%.
Oh, that's cute. Long way back.
That just tells me that right, they're perfect. I don't know what. It's very interesting that my short fiction is like Middle Asia, traveling because of
Right.
culturally.
Yeah.
That perspective, very much.
I don't show anything yet.
Okay.
Yeah, where did you get that?
That's.
Okay, I understand. Okay.
Okay, let's go ahead and get ready to start. So the second part of this morning's session is I'm going to introduce you to a recruitment and retention core facility that's available here at UAB, and Julie Schack and Cynthia Johnson are the co-managers. Mona Fuad is the director. They're based in the Medical Towers building up on 11th Avenue.
11th Avenue, 18th Street.
And they'll describe what they're all about. They're embedded within the Minority Health Research Center, and I wanted to just take a second actually to try to sensitize you to one of the guiding principles of the CCTS, which, as you know, sponsors this course. So the CCTS really has as its mission to try to empower the clinical and translational research enterprise with the goal of really improving the population's access to new medical technologies, to better health outcomes, with a special interest in disparities, kinds of issues that have that show disparities within the population for the disease spectrum. And I wanted to take a second to say what that means. If you look at the CCTS website, you'll see that mission. And I want to just make it clear that a lot of people think of disparities research as really racial disparities as the primary thing. But I think we want to make it clear that in all of our programs, we talk about, for pilot grants and stuff, that a program will be more successful if it has some focus on disparities. But we view disparities as a tool to dissect mechanisms of disease and to recognize that there are all kinds of disparities. There are disparities between young and old. There are disparities between the rich and the poor. There are disparities between people of different ancestry. There's all kinds of disparities. And so I think what we're trying to do in talking through issues around disparities, I don't know whether this is going to come up in any of the things you say, but I know some of your retention and recruitment activities are focused on helping to have better outcomes, keeping research populations from groups that traditionally drop out of studies more often than others, to keep them involved. And so I just want you to be aware that the CCTS, when we talk about disparities, we take a very broad view of that, and we really want you to think about the way in which differences in the way people respond to their genetic environment or their physical environment often provide new information about what's going on in the disease that can help you to understand the pathogenesis and opportunities for treatment better. So that's the point we're trying to make with making disparities a sort of central part of our tenets. So anyway, I'll let Julie get on with her presentation. And again, this is a really great resource on the campus to help people to have the best outcomes with the clinical and patient-centered research that they do.
Thank you so much. I'm Julie Schock, and I am one of the co-managers here in the Recruitment and Retention Shared Facility, and I co-manage with Cynthia Johnson, who's here with me today, and we are under the direction of Dr. Mona Fuad, who is the Division Director of Preventive Medicine, and that's where we're housed, is up on 11th Avenue and 18th Street. So we actually have a research clinic there in preventive medicine as well, so I think that's part of our strategy of us being up there, is we've got easy parking up there. So as we begin, just a little bit about the recruitment unit. It actually started in 1996 with the Women's Health Initiative, and in 1997 we actually changed the name to the Recruitment and Retention Shared Facility, and that's what we've been ever since. So over the course of the 21 years or so that we've been in existence, we've recruited about 33,000 participants into studies. We've screened a lot more than that, but we've recruited actually 33,000 into studies, and that spans across about 90 studies. We have a team, so CY and I co-manage. We're also the coordinators of the studies, but we also have telephone interviewers. We have research data managers. We have analysts. We have patient navigators, community outreach. We kind of have a broad spectrum, so we can get whatever the study is, we can tailor a customized recruitment strategy to your needs.
So one of the things that you will notice that as you begin your research, you will probably run into some of the 4,300 WHI patients or participants. That particular trial lasted over 16 years, and so some of those people are out there now, and you'll constantly get feedback saying, you know, when are you going to have the next trial. So good recruitment, having the practice of being able to engage and retain participants, as well as that underserved population, you will see that there are a lot of benefits in being able to have expert people who are participating, or expert staff. Even your staff can be considered experts as you move forward with your research.
And just a little bit about us currently. I wrote this down yesterday. We currently have 2 managers. We have a data manager, we have 4 research interviewers, and we have 5 patient navigators, 4 that focus specifically on cancer, and then 1 that has moved into a cardiovascular role. So, and we're ever growing at this point. So we've got a lot of different ways that we can enhance recruitment. Let's see. So we consider ourselves that we recruit for any study. We do have a wide variety of studies that we've recruited for, from population-based studies with thousands of people to focus groups that have 6 to 8, and conducting multiple focus groups over time. We also do qualitative surveys. We do telephone surveys, and we have done those, and oftentimes we do them all at the same time with the staff that we currently have. We can consent and have consented a good many into studies. We enroll and we schedule patients into the clinic if that's appropriate for a study.
More recently, we had such a study where initially we were asked to do focus groups. We wanted to test the instrument. So we did that. We had a series of focus groups. The data was looked at. The instruments were refined. We had another series of focus groups as it related to that. And from that, we actually started doing telephone surveys. They developed a tool for us to actually go out and then survey a group, a segment, cross-sectional of the state of Alabama, as a matter of fact, to get additional data as it related to that particular protocol. So, you know, it can have both in it.
And of course, we can provide access to data analysts, behavioralists, statisticians, and epidemiology who specialize in health disparities if your study protocol requires that. Also, we do provide retention services with follow-up data collection. So these are just some of the examples of RSF studies that we have done in the past. The Women's Health Initiative we talked about, and so I mentioned there was 4,300 people that were involved in that study, and we put our African American rate. We had a 40% African American rate in that study. The prostate, lung, colorectal, ovarian cancer screening trial had 6,188, and we recruited all of those into this study under the RRSF, with 30% African American in that study. And then the other one I'll mention here is the impact increasing minority participation in clinical trials. That's funded by NCI. We had 270 recruited into that study, and 100% of those were African American. I'll talk about that study a little bit later, more specifically.
And on that specific chart, we constantly update that for current successes that we have. Some of our investigators who are submitting would like to include us in that initial submission. So what they do, will ask for information from us. We'll give them their history, we'll give them successes, and we'll give them boilerplates of what we've done. And that adds a lot of validity to, you know, if they're going to use the recruitment unit, it shows our success rates, and we're well known as far as the participating in NIH projects, and that carries a lot to say. You are using a group of people who know how to successfully conduct recruitment activities.
So given all these studies, of course, we have information systems that we've developed over time, over the 20 years we've been in existence. We have 4 unique to us. We have a mass mailing system where we have 4 million unique records that include race, age, gender, and address, some telephone, that we can actually use that information depending upon what your research goals are, we can actually pull that population, drop mail to those specifics. So we're not dropping general population, we're dropping by race, by age, to hopefully hit that target that you're looking for so that they can call back into, and we can screen them at that point or survey them. We also have the 3-part recruitment and retention tracking system. This tracks, this is a customized system to RRSF. It actually tracks every recruitment source that you, that an investigator may use or we may use in our research and our recruitment strategy. And it actually, what's neat about it is it'll track per mailing. So you know if one area in town actually responded better, then you know the yield of what that response was, and a yield in another area of town was close to 10% or something low, you know not to go back there. So it helps in recruitment costs that those are constantly analyzed, and those are constantly reported, usually weekly, to the investigators. So we can change our strategies if we need to. We can add more strategies. Mailing is just one strategy. We can actually track if you go on to a health minute on TV or something like that, we can track that source. If you, I'm trying to think of it, if it's web-based, we can track that source. So it's really unique and it's customizable to every project, and it prints out a nice report that you can make good decisions about what your next steps in recruitment will be. And it also tracks every single contact with a participant. So if they have participated in WHI, we know they participated in WHI. We know what type of participant they were too. If they enrolled and stayed enrolled, if they decided to withdraw, what their reasons were, we have that information there.
Another unique feature to that particular system is that, as Julie was saying, it builds a history on participants, and each participant in there has a history, whether or not they were mailed to for 5 projects, or whether or not they responded to those projects, or whether or not they were screened and enrolled in that particular project. The investigator at that point has the option of saying, I don't want to use participants who may have enrolled in this study, in another study. So we have that feature of being able to select, don't give me anyone, we don't want to mail to anyone who's participated or have an enrollment status in another project. So that helps us to not contaminate one project to another, and those are important features there that's built into the system.
We also have the health profile system. This is a questionnaire that we typically ask, of course, at health fairs and things like that, but usually at the end of every study, we also ask to add one question to the screener or the survey, and that is, are you willing to participate in other studies, yes or no? A simple question, but saying yes does allow us to complete this health profile system questionnaire, which has some basic demographics, address, name, things like that, and then age, of course, and then just a few different types of health issues that a person may have. Very kind of broad: diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease. But what this helps us do is we actually add this into our system. So if you call us and you say you need someone who has is between the ages of 50 and 65, who's interested in studies and has cardiovascular disease, we can actually select a customized list for you, and we can actually call them. IRB has given us approval. This is an IRB approved form, and we can actually call them and offer the study to them, and then they can make the choice if they want to participate. We also can drop mail to this population too. But the nice thing is this is actually a system we can go in and literally be calling in the afternoon. So it's a nice tool to use, and we've got about 25,000 of those, and we're constantly updating them. We have them at the MHRC at the Health Smart location. They actually collect these for us as well. So we also have study-specific questionnaires. We call this the Q Builder. This is where we actually build screeners into our data set, and it supports branching and anything. The interviewer just has to go on. They start with the script, and as they select yes or no, or however the participant answers, it automatically feeds the next part. There's no There's not looking, the interviewer does not have to make a choice of where they go next. The system automatically does that for them. So it's a nice tool to have. And then of course, other systems, REDCap's really popular. We work a lot in REDCap. We work about daily in multiple types of REDCaps, whether that's UAB or VA or our preventive medicine REDCap. We do use that quite often. We also have used study tracks. That was for Medicaid, the CMS project that we did a couple years ago, where we interviewed about 58 participants in that system. And then of course we're using I2B2, which is a new to us system. Probably last year we started using this for which searches the electronic medical record. We can put in ICD-10 codes and find out, and of course some patient information like age and things like that, and figure out an aggregate number of how many would fall within that category, and then we can request a patient set once IRB approval is obtained.
So one other thing, going back to that Q Builder, in the Q Builder system, our data manager, once the project is approved and you have IRB approval for your questionnaires and your scripts, it is then built into this Q Builder system. So our data manager can build the variables in there, or the investigator could say, I want to build, to say what the variables would be to do the extract on. So he or she can take that screener, add those variables, and then those are programmed in. Or we actually have data managers who go in and do that for you, give you the data dictionary so that you are aware and can do your extract or look at your data accordingly. Looking at that study track system, which was of course unique to the Comprehensive Cancer Center, where we did the Deep South Navigation Project, actually looking at participating with a section of 12 other sites in the Southeast to actually screen participants, cancer patients, for this particular project. And in CATI, the CATI system that's up there, all of you are probably familiar with CAN-CORS. That is the system that was used to screen the CAN-CORS population of people.
Do you know how far back these data systems go? Like, for example, the I2B2, does it go back specific time frame, or does it have access to every?
I think it's everything. It does not have, of course, the deceased patient population in that, but they can obtain that data too if you need to get next to kin and survey, things like that. That's something I learned last week when I was approached for the study. We were looking at caregivers of cancer patients who had passed. So that's the only, but as far as I know, everything else can be retrieved out of I2B2. So, of course, this is just some the first steps in successful recruitment in a clinical trial. We always recruit to retain, and so we carefully screen our patients. We build questionnaires with scripting that is very detailed, so that we actually end up with a population that once the investigator comes in or their clinical team comes in to meet that patient, we've got a patient who's pretty well committed to learning a little bit more about this study and hopefully making that decision to select that to join your study. Of course, poorly screened subjects will yield a retention problem, and then of course that will extend recruitment time, and that will increase your cost significantly. So we really reiterate screening, building a screening tool that is very detailed. And it may take a little more time up front in recruitment in our unit, but in the end you'll end up with a very good quality participant who is dedicated to being a part of the study for the long term. So definition of successful recruitment, of course, reaching your goals on a schedule, setting that schedule ahead of time, setting the goals ahead of time, setting the budget ahead of time helps us, and what we've learned just over time is that if we have our investigators, we collaborate with you, We talk to you about your goals, the schedule. If the time frame seems a little too short, we may say we may need another month or so. But we try to do that all up front, so by the time we are on board with your study, we feel like we really can recruit all of the patients that are required for the study in the time frame and on budget. And then, of course, we recruit to retain, like we always say.
Yeah, to me, Julie and I were discussing this slide, and I think that this is really the hub of who we are, and and that's how I define it. It's really the passion behind the particular our unit, because if we are successful, the investigator is successful. And on campus, with the number of investigators that we are working with, it is our goal, it is our mission for all of our investigators to be successful. And that happens when we work together, we agree upon the goals, we reach our goals on time, we work within the budget, because we understand that budgets that investigators have to do this. And it's not just the recruitment end of it. There are other components to your budget. So we need to do that within the budget that's set aside. And then we need to make sure that that group of participants that agree to participate in that study participate for the duration. And so we put a lot of emphasis on that. And that is not only the goal of the managers, but it has to be the goal, communicated goal to all of our staff, that we are all doing the same thing at the same time for the same purpose.
So we do use principles of health behavior theory that are most applicable to a specific study environment and target population. These are just a few examples, and we'll go through these kind of quickly. The health belief model has been around for a long time. We have the concepts on the left, and I'll just highlight two of the perceived barriers, the action or the costs. We talk to participants. We try to talk to them. We try to get to know what their barriers may be. We want it, of course, being in Birmingham, it's pretty research savvy here, so everybody's going to ask about an incentive and how much or what the incentive is to participate in the study. Structural barriers, that would be, of course, like maybe someone needs to be picked up with a yellow cab taxi to be brought in for clinical trials. Is that possible with this study? And that varies by study. Some have room for that, others do not. And that, of course, depends on the population that you're looking to recruit there. For cues to action, make it easier for participants to enroll. I think the biggest thing here is make it convenient for them. And that oftentimes may not be exactly convenient for study staff. They may have to work one Saturday a month to get those clinic visits in. They may have to work after hours to get that survey done. But that's the things that we have to do in order to make that barrier go away for that participant, and it's important for the study to be successful. So that's what RSF tries to do. So social marketing, taking the lessons and tools from commercial marketing and using them for behavioral changes is, to me, kind of a global view of a research study, the product, the price, the place, and the promotion. And just going through these, and I think we go through these usually our initial first two meetings with an investigator about who they're trying to reach, what's the benefits, and these are the questions we try to ask so that we can communicate your messaging to the community, whether that be a postcard, whether that be in a church setting, whatever that looks like. This is what we try to go through, and then we determine and strategize and present something back to you as an investigator and say, this is what we think you need to do. What are your thoughts? And then we collaborate together. This is how much it'll cost and things like that. And then, of course, you have the trans-theoretical model from a patient's perception where they are thinking about joining the study, actually joining it, and then being a good quality participant so we have no retention problems at all, hopefully. So the recruitment process, this is kind of like what I was saying a second ago with meeting with you. This is what we're going to go through first. Who are you looking for? Where are they going to be located? Are they in the state of Alabama? Are they within a 30-mile radius of Birmingham? Are they in the southeast? What's your mode of contact with them? What do you want to do as far as what your research protocol plan is? If you're going to survey them by phone, if we need to bring them in for in-person interviews, so that's a consent enroll type process. And then how we're going to reach them. We're going to do a variety of different things or multiple things. We're going to try mass mailing. Doing postcards we found out are more effective but they don't go in envelopes. People don't open envelopes these days apparently, but they just kind of shred it. And but we found postcards are pretty effective for recruitment tools in mass mailings. Physician referral, we're going to use social media, patient navigation, in-clinic type settings. What's the strategy and how are we going to achieve those goals together? Then we would create recruitment materials, and this goes from a postcard down to the screener, down to the scripting that people need to say face to face. We customize that to your study. We've done a lot of these that have been IRB approved, so we kind of know what IRB expects and what they're looking for, and so we just tailor that to your study and try to customize that a little bit for you. If it's scripting is a big thing on the front end. Like I said, we recruit to retain. So we like to tell, of course, everything pretty much that we can about the study initially and ask them, is this something you're interested in? If they say no, there's no need to go any further. If they say yes, well, can I have about 10 minutes of your time to ask you a few questions? And then you go through your screening process there. And then, of course, once we actually get the patients enrolled into the study, we actually track and monitor the recruitment progress through there once they're enrolled. So once our numbers start coming down for how many we need to recruit and your numbers are going up for enrollment, we are monitoring that constantly to make sure that we hit goal and there's 0 to recruit. So reasons to participate, these are benefits to self and altruism, kind of typically the things we usually see: free clinical access, healthcare professionals, access to healthcare professionals, paid for participation, that's the big one. Positive feelings to join a special group. I think this one kind of came up more recently in a focus group where we really are seeing almost, not only is it positive feelings, it's almost like a passion that they have to talk about. This was a surgical trial that they had done, and they had good outcomes, and they wanted to tell about it, tell the investigator about it, how much they appreciated that, and how much it helped them in their recovery. Also, of course, altruism, helping the future generations, helping people with the same condition, that actually comes up quite a bit. I may have COPD and have maybe having a hard time, but I'm hoping in participating in this study, even though it's a randomized trial, I'm hoping that will help COPD patients in the future. So we do see that one a good bit. So overcoming barriers. In recruitment, you're always going to have barriers, and in our unit, we're the kind of the front lines to address a lot of these issues. So this is how the barriers are and the activities that we do to overcome them. Fear and mistrust is still very real, especially in our population here in Alabama. We see it a lot. So we train our staff for that. So they can, they listen, encourage questions. If they don't know the questions, we'll find out the questions. We'll find out the answers for you. Conduct those past experience, if they have a bad past experience with UAB, or if they have a billing issue. Sometimes we get that question of, are you associated with billing? Are you going to tell them I'm getting? No, we are separate. We are research. We are on, no, we have nothing to do with financial. We don't know who they are. So we try to overcome those barriers to where it's not a barrier for research. Conduct information sessions. We're a big fan of orientation sessions in a group setting. We bring in about 3 or 4 people to actually do an orientation session if it's possible within the research strategy or with your research, especially general population. This works really well. And they come in together in a group. You have someone go over the consent form with them, address questions. A lot of times you'll have different questions from the different people in the room, but it makes overall that everyone feels like all plus more of their questions were answered. And so by the time they sign that consent form at that end of the information session, they're committed to being in the study.
And that's where the underserved population, I think that, you might want to, we take into consideration when you have fear and mistrust, and then you're asking them to sign a consent form. So you have to be really careful there in making sure that you explain the project exactly the way it is. You take the time to answer all of their questions, and you administer the consent form exactly the way it is written, because that's important. That's a part of the IRB. It's a part of the IRB training. It's a part of the IRB expectation for us when we're doing these projects or recruiting participants into projects. And we have a lot of African Americans, women. So we make sure that we dispel any kind of mistrust, misunderstanding, or concerns that they may have about that particular project. And that's another very important area for us as we move in recruiting participants for investigators.
So overcoming barriers with healthcare providers. This is for our in-clinic recruitment, and we do this. We're currently doing this on a few studies. The main thing we hear for providers is lack of time, some legality, but mainly lack of time is the big one that I hear. So what we did to overcome this barrier is we actually started going to the clinic meetings that are early in the morning, real early in the morning, and actually presenting about 10 minutes of this study that we're going to be recruiting for. And so once we did that, we get approvals to go into the clinic. We actually put recruiters in the clinic. So we kind of stand off to the side. We do this in Kirkland Clinic all the time. We kind of stand off to the side. We know who we're going to be seeing that day, or who we feel like is a good candidate for our study for that day. And then the doctors can come in, and as they're going through the halls, they just kind of give us thumbs up, or they kind of know who we're going to go see. We kind of point into a room, they say thumbs up, or if it's not a good idea, they let us know that too, so that we do get their approval. But it's very streamlined, very simple. They're not recruiting. Their nurses are not recruiting. We're recruiting. It takes a little bit of time to build that trust, but it can happen. And like I said, we're doing that now. We've got a study that's in clinic, and we just crossed the 200 mark on that study. So it is quite possible to do. But lack of time and just overcoming that barrier, we just put our people there. And if we have to address something, which we really haven't at this point, but if we did have to address something, we have a very good relationship with the physicians, and so they have our cell phones and they have our email address. They just shoot us an email or just give us a call, and then they all say we can pay them if we've got an issue going on, and it works quite well.
We meet often with the investigator on different projects. So there's a clear understanding and expectation from the investigator, what they are looking for, what they need. We're in clinic. If there are changes, there's always the time that we're meeting with them to make adjustments. If there's something new that came up that they need to communicate to the recruitment staff, we know that. Our team is always informed. We have regular meetings with our team to make sure that we're passing down any changes as it relates to how we get into the clinic, who we're seeing, what the physicians may have noticed, what the nurses may have noticed, what they would like for us to do differently. All of those things are communicated to us due to those regular meetings with the investigators, regular meetings with our team, to make sure that we incorporate those changes as we go forward with the recruitment.
Mm-hmm. And we do have to build multi-levels of trust, not only with physician, but with nurses, and also just the front desk people that are checking people in and out. Because we need to know if they showed for their appointment. That's important for us to know, because we don't want to sit around with someone who no-showed that day. So we've had to, you know, like I said, it takes a little bit of time, but it doesn't take too much time. It's often shorter than what I thought anyway. It's a little bit shorter, and then once you get a good system going, recruitment can actually really flourish in this setting. So overcoming barriers to study designs, consent forms, it's kind of what CY said a little bit earlier. I remember our retired manager once said, you know, this was written by lawyers for other lawyers, and that's often quite true. It's got a lot of, it's going to tell you a lot of the risk, a lot of everything, a lot of pages to it. Sometimes I think a consent form I saw recently was about 25 pages. So it can be kind of intimidating. That's where we think providing the adequate time, which is in those information sessions, is really a good idea, or at least allotting a good amount of time for one-on-one to sit and go over the consent form together. Sometimes you get randomization barriers. This is where I think you put this in screening and ask them if they're willing to be in either group. If they say no, then you have your answer there. If they say yes, then they're a good candidate to come up, bring them on into the clinic. So you don't waste their time. If they're not going to be willing, but they want to be just on the study drug, and you know you're in a randomized clinical trial, you can explain to them the gold standard, but if they still don't want to do that, go ahead and get that at screener so you save that potential participant time. The time commitment, this is just to be upfront with the visit schedule. Some visit schedules are quite heavy over a year. Some are not. We've got, but explaining that up front, even in a screener, this has 10 visit schedules, 10 visits to UAB downtown. I think that's important to communicate to them so that that when they come in, they have a good idea. They're not surprised by the consent form that says they're going to have to come to UAB 10 times in 10 weeks. They need to know that up front. And then, of course, any required procedures, this is when we ask, if there's blood draws, if there's IV infusions, if there's MRIs, those are things we add to our screener, our phone screener as well, so that they can tell us whether or not that will be a problem for them or not. And then problem solve with the participant. They have a question, we need to, we don't know the answer, talk to them, get the investigator involved, is what we try to do to make sure that they're fully informed when they sign the study consent form. So these are some samples of recruitment materials that we have used. Like I said, we're big postcard fans these days, so these two on the left are postcards. The top one was for a focus group. It was a one-time focus group. It was for looking for whether or not people decided to become organ donors at the DMV. They were paid $100 for their time, a 90-minute session. So we had good response here. I think 24 focus groups came out of this postcard that was done last year, within the past year or so. The bottom one is a clinical trial that we did. It was a cardiovascular trial about heart attack or strokes. We did this study a couple of years ago, and we had good success with the recruitment responses. The protocol was tight, but we had good responses with people being interested. And the right is a letter. It's an opt-out letter. We always choose opt-out versus opt-in. This was for a study where we were doing surveys, and we dropped this from the physician to their patient population, told them a little bit about the study, told them that they would be called within 5 days of receiving the letter unless they called us and decided they did not want to participate. That's what we prefer to do in a letter situation that has to go in an envelope. So we, of course, have access to their phone numbers, so we call them once that mail has been confirmed to be dropped in those households. This is an example of some of our recruitment progress reports. We actually give progress reports weekly, and we do them in a variety of styles. We really customize it to what the investigator wants. The one on the right is by interviewer. You see why I was called a lot of people in that study. 1,600 people that she called in this study. I called about 358, so 1,603 for that study, but it's by interviewer, so you can see who's working on that study. The top one was a mailing study where we were tracking surveys and then being mailed back to us, and if they were completed. And the bottom was actually a study that we did out in the community, going door to door, doing surveys in the Fairfield and Forestdale communities, and all the different outcomes that came out of that. So that's just some examples.
One thing about that that report, so the T-trial phone screen, you see that Julie and I are actually screening for that study. So as we not only managers, we provide the reports to the investigator, but we're going to make sure that it gets done, even if we are having to do it, to do some of the work to make sure that that happens. And so we were heavily involved in it because, you know, the protocol is extremely difficult for this particular testosterone trial that was going on. So it required a lot of explanations, a lot of scheduling, making sure that, you know, the initial screen was done, because there were follow-up clinic screens before you were actually enrolled into that particular study. So there were a lot of questions as it related to that.
So retention, you always have retention issues in every in studies, and you have to figure out, we have to figure out a way to overcome those. So these are just some of the retention issues that we sometimes see. Retention issues can be costly. So we of course try to recruit to retain, like I keep saying, but but this is some of the things that we do see, that, and you know, things happen, life does happen. But if they're in our studies, we want to make sure that they can be reachable, and we can overcome a barrier that they may have come across. So there's 3 basic elements: prevention, maintenance, and recovery. So for prevention, screen out potential non-compliant participants is what we talked about the in-depth telephone interviews, conduct orientation sessions prior to enrollment. All of those things will prevent major retention problems, hopefully. For maintenance, provide good service. So this is where your staff is so important. Having the same staff call them back and build relationships with participants is really important, if possible. Sometimes that may not be possible, but if you can, that's very important. Set visit expectation. If you have a 5-hour clinic visit, then they need to know there's a 5-hour clinic visit involved in this study. Early reminders, so we do lots of reminders. We drop reminders usually about 2 weeks before by mail to their home, and then we also call them and remind them. We have a scheduling program that we have access to that we use there. And then that personal contact is just that development of having that same person call that person. They're assigned that person to walk them through the study. So also another strategy is non-monetary incentives. These are tokens, basically, for outside of the payment incentives. So one of our studies, actually, the PLCO project used this strategy. It was a 17-year study, and they actually gave calendars every year for their patients that had the logo on it and had the telephone number of the person that did the annual study update. So their participants, actually, there were over 6,000 participants enrolled in that study. But as the participants, the further they got along, they started wanting these calendars, and we would hear the manager get calls 2 months before the new year asking if their calendar was coming, and they were real excited about their calendar. So it was something small, really very, you know, didn't cost the study a whole lot of money, that they really enjoyed. And we're really big fans of magnets too, where it has your study logo and phone number and contact information. And of course, birthday cards, newsletters, just keeping your study constantly in front of them is a good strategy there. And for PLCO, it's a 17-year study. They had a 98% retention rate, so it worked very well for them. For recovery for dropouts, at this point you do have to move to a case management style. So you do have to identify what is their specific barrier. Is it childcare? Is it what's going on? Do they need gas money to come here? And how do we overcome that? If they won't come in for their visit, then keep that door open. Ask them if we can call them every 6 months, things like that, to follow up with them, and just keep that contact going. Even if it's not, even if they're not coming in to get that MRI or that CT, at least they can, we can talk to them and know how they're doing, and still get some really good data out of that contact.
And keeping notes, keeping lots of notes on if you've had a conversation with someone and you know that they're experiencing some type of problem, having the note for the next call to say, I know you were going through this problem, you know, how are you doing? You were having issues with transportation, or you were having issues with providing care for an elderly parent. You know, how are you doing? You know, how can we, you know, support you? And those are really important pieces in keeping their doors open with, when it's hard to get people who are participating in this study to come back in, making sure that you're aware of some of their issues, and then you can listen and understand that.
So this is a study that actually our patient navigators have been doing since about 2006. This is increasing minority participation in clinical trials. This is the one that I spoke to you the first few slides that had about 270 enrolled, and 100% of those are African American. So they had 3 aims, and they're listed here. Educate minority patients with cancer about the trials, assist them with the recruitment, and then maintain them. Once they're in, walk them through the process so they stay in the clinical trials. So our patient navigators, we have 4 that focus on cancer, and they just provide general information about how clinical trials are conducted. Sometimes patients just don't understand that, and they provide that education piece for them. Of course, protect patient rights and protections that are in place. They assist them in understanding consent forms, so they will meet them in the clinic. If a nurse, research nurse is going to go over the consent form with them, they'll be there too to help you know, answer questions or explain things a little bit more if they need that. They partner with the physician, oftentimes nurses, oftentimes social workers too, and almost with the entire medical team of that patient to make sure that they walk through the clinical trial process and complete the process with them. Let's see, what else? And they're also a link to community services. So there may be a need the patient has at the home, and they will try to go into community resources and find what they need. So I know one patient a few years ago didn't have an oven, so they couldn't cook themselves hot food. So actually our patient navigators were able to get an oven donated for that patient. So that's just one example, but there are many, many examples. And then they provide emotional social support. They have their phone numbers. They actually have cell phone numbers as well that are dedicated for patient navigation, and that they can call and access their patient navigator at any point. So these are our patient navigators here on the right. This is Angela Williams, Diane Williams, Kimberly Robinson, and Elise McLinn. And the biggest thing about, and they have been with Impact since it started. So I think that's a great success of the program, is that they actually not only went in and had to develop all the relationships, but they've stayed. They really are passionate about what they do and passionate about the partnership they make with the physician and the patient. And recently they had a publication come out of their patient navigation support, and 74.5% of those enrolled in trials completed the trials, compared to 37.5% who chose not to receive patient navigation support. So this is kind of just a summary of what we do. We do recruitment and retention plans for proposals. We, of course, reach them with targeted mass mailings, population-specific recruitment materials. Everything's custom. Everything is custom to your project. And then, of course, we will tailor that to what your need is. If the community outreach is appropriate, we do that on-site clinic recruitment. We can do that too. We do a lot of telephone surveys. I think we've got about, on one study alone, about 2,000 to do this year. We do focus groups. We provide focus group moderators, focus group co-moderators, and then, of course, in-person qualitative surveys and interviews, excuse me. We've done those. Our technological edge is that we do have that 4 million name database. We also have the health profile system that we can access as well. And now another thing is the I2B2, and we're using that a good bit these days. We also have a community connection. We've worked really hard over the past 20 years to build trust with the community. So we do have a lot of contacts with senior centers, with community centers in the area. So depending on the population, depending on who you're looking for, we can actually go to those community centers and try to partner with them. Sometimes we use their facilities just to present research that's going on at UAB. So we try to bridge the gap between the communities and the investigators. So our kind of tagline is, while you focus on research, we'll secure your participants. So that is all we have. Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
I have a few. So it looks like you do work out of state. On one of the last slides, I saw Georgia was on there. Do you work beyond Georgia and Alabama?
So the question is if we work out of state beyond Georgia and Alabama, and yes.
Okay.
We're actually doing a project right now where we are in Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
Okay.
Yes.
And then do you offer, because as junior investigators, and I don't know if there's vouchers for this service as well, would you consult if we can't afford the package and help us at least get the information?
Okay, so the question is if there's not vouchers, which we don't have vouchers for the program, but will we consult? And yes, we do. Mm-hmm.
But there's no reason you couldn't apply for a voucher through the CCPS for some services that just would have to be, I don't actually know how big a scope you would need, and it would have to fit within the budget to move to a position where it could be that you would have support to fund the rest of the study.
Okay. And then you mentioned the importance of study staff. Do you help recruit staff?
So the importance of study staff, no, I don't. We haven't. We just our staff has just grown and stayed with us as we've been there. But no, at this point we've not done that.
However, we have acted as study staff.
I would say, yeah, we do. We do act as the study staff for a lot of our, and that's becoming in the past 3 or 4 years seems to be more of the trend as they, because of the resources that we have, because of how funding works. You know, with us, because we are all obviously working on study grants constantly. We have 11 people that we support, and you know, even if it's a big grant and it's 5 years. At 5 years it's gone, so oftentimes we roll on to new projects as essentially the study staff.
So we've had one project out of Children's Hospital where there was the investigator and the nurse, and so the nurse was multitasking and the doctor was seeing patients, and you know, they weren't making any headway with the study. Even though they had materials up, they didn't have anyone to contact with the patients if they were interested in participating. So the investigator reached out to us, and we became the study staff to help organize that, to help make sure that the study was moving. However, we were reporting to them, but you know, they had all of the reports. They knew exactly what to do. We made sure the patients were scheduled. They established this scheduling guideline. I can see patients this week on this day. I can see 3 here, 5 here. And so we followed that particular protocol, and the study was successful.
Any others? Well, thank you very much for allowing us to be here today. How did you want to? I didn't know if it was time.
during lunch. Sorry, I have to run off, but this was just the right kind of thing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Thank
I'm right. For after a while.
Are you? Yeah.
After a while.
That's probably why I can't
do it and do that.
I told you, you need to.
You're only one human being. Thank you, lady.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. See you later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Bye.
Thanks.